If someone hurt your child in front of an entire room full of relatives, what would you do? Would you scream? Would you fight? Or would you stay completely calm, knowing that your next 6 words would change everyone's life forever? 3 years ago, my mother-in-law publicly humiliated my 8-year-old son during Thanksgiving dinner. She looked him in the eyes, slapped him across the face, and shouted words no child should ever hear. "You're not real family. Get out of my house." The room became silent. 22 people watched. No one defended him. Not my husband. Not my father-in-law. Not my sisters-in-law. Not even the relatives who had always claimed they loved Ethan. Everyone acted as if nothing had happened. My little boy stood there with tears filling his eyes, holding the handmade Thanksgiving card he had spent 2 days creating for his grandmother. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked at her and said 6 quiet words. The moment she understood what those words meant, the dinner plate slipped from her hands and shattered across the floor. This is the story of the Thanksgiving dinner that destroyed one family forever. My name is Sarah, and before I tell you what happened that night, you need to understand why Thanksgiving meant so much to my son. Ethan wasn't my biological child. When he was only 4 years old, I adopted him after my first husband passed away following a long illness. Those were the hardest years of my life. Ethan had already experienced more pain than most adults ever face. He lost a man he called dad before he was old enough to understand why. For a long time, it was just the two of us. We learned to smile again together. We celebrated birthdays together. We built new traditions together. Then, 3 years later, I met Daniel. Daniel was kind, patient, and gentle with Ethan from the very beginning. He never treated him like someone else's child. He played baseball with him in the backyard, helped him with homework, and tucked him into bed whenever I worked late. The day Daniel proposed to me, he knelt down in front of Ethan first. He smiled and asked, "Would it be okay if I became your dad too?" Ethan threw his arms around him without saying a single word. That hug answered everything. For the first time in years, I believed we could finally become a real family. But while Daniel accepted Ethan completely, his mother never did. Margaret had very different ideas about what family meant. The first time we met, she smiled politely, but there was something cold in her eyes. She asked Ethan only one question. "So, who's your real father?" Ethan looked confused. He quietly pointed toward Daniel. "He's my dad." Margaret forced a smile. "No, I mean your real father." I immediately changed the subject, but the damage had already been done. On the drive home, Ethan stared out the window. Finally, he asked, "Mom, am I not real?" Those words broke my heart. From that day forward, Margaret never openly insulted Ethan in front of everyone. Instead, she used small comments, cruel little reminders. Whenever the family took pictures, she'd whisper, "Maybe Ethan should stand at the end." When gifts were exchanged at Christmas, Ethan's present was always noticeably smaller than everyone else's. At birthdays, she somehow forgot his favorite cake. She never called him her grandson. She always introduced him as Daniel's wife's little boy. Daniel noticed these things too. Every time he confronted his mother, she laughed. "Oh, you're imagining things. You're too sensitive." I'm treating him exactly the same. But she wasn't. Children notice everything, even when adults pretend they don't. As the years passed, Ethan stopped asking why Grandma didn't like him. Instead, he started trying harder to earn her love. He drew pictures for her. He picked flowers from our garden. He made homemade birthday cards. He even saved part of his allowance to buy her a small Christmas ornament one year. She thanked him politely, then placed it in a drawer without ever hanging it on her tree. I watched my son keep trying, and I watched his heart break a little more every single holiday. When Thanksgiving approached that year, I didn't want to go. I told Daniel we should celebrate at home, just the 3 of us, but Daniel believed one good holiday could heal years of tension. "Please," he said, "let's give Mom one more chance." I looked at Ethan. He was sitting on the living room floor, carefully coloring bright orange and red leaves around another handmade card. Across the front he had written, in large, uneven letters, "Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma. I love you." He smiled proudly as he held it up for me to see. "I think she'll love this one." I smiled back, but deep inside, I had a feeling this Thanksgiving would change our lives forever. The next afternoon, We packed the turkey dish I had prepared, dressed in our nicest clothes, and drove toward Margaret's house. None of us knew that before the night was over, our family would never be the same again. The drive to Margaret's house took almost an hour. Ethan sat in the back seat, carefully holding his handmade Thanksgiving card so it wouldn't bend. Every few minutes, he would open it, read the message he had written inside, and smile to himself. "Dear Grandma, thank you for inviting us. I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving. I love you." His handwriting was uneven, and a few words were misspelled, but every letter came straight from his heart. Daniel glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "She's going to love it, buddy." Ethan smiled. "I hope so." I wanted to believe that too, but something deep inside me whispered that today would be different. When we arrived, Margaret's house was already full. Cars lined both sides of the street. Children were running across the front yard while adults laughed on the porch, holding cups of coffee. As soon as we walked inside, Margaret greeted Daniel with a warm hug. "My handsome son." She kissed both his cheeks, then she hugged his sisters. She hugged every grandchild. When she finally reached Ethan, she simply looked at him. "Oh, you're here." That was it. No hug, no smile, no welcome. I watched Ethan's shoulders sink just a little. Still, he smiled politely. "Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma." Margaret nodded before turning away to greet another guest. I quietly squeezed Ethan's hand. He pretended not to notice. The afternoon continued with everyone helping in the kitchen. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house. Football played loudly in the living room while relatives laughed together. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But I noticed something that no one else seemed to see. Every family photo being taken somehow excluded Ethan. Whenever the photographer called everyone together, Margaret would say things like, "Only the real grandkids for this one," or "Ethan can take the picture." Each time, my little boy forced a smile and stepped aside. Daniel frowned. "Mom, Ethan belongs in the picture." Margaret laughed as if it were all a misunderstanding. "Oh, don't be so serious. We'll take another one later." That second picture never happened. An hour later, Ethan walked over to Margaret with the handmade card. He held it behind his back, smiling nervously. "I made something for you." Margaret accepted it without much interest. She opened the card, looked at it for barely 2 seconds, then placed it beside a stack of unopened mail. "Thank you." She immediately turned back to her conversation. No hug, no appreciation, no kind words. Ethan stood there for a moment, waiting. Finally, he whispered, "You're welcome." When he returned to me, I could see he was trying not to cry. "Maybe she's busy," he said quietly. I smiled, though my heart was breaking. "I'm sure she noticed how much work you put into it." He nodded, trying to believe me. Dinner was finally ready. Everyone gathered around the large dining table. There were more than 20 people squeezed into the room. The table looked beautiful. Golden turkey, fresh rolls, mashed potatoes, stuffing, pumpkin pie waiting in the kitchen. The smell of roasted turkey filled the house. Football played loudly in the living room while relatives laughed together. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But I noticed something that no one else seemed to see. Every family photo being taken somehow excluded Ethan. Whenever the photographer called everyone together, Margaret would say things like, "Only the real grandkids for this one," or "Ethan can take the picture." Each time, my little boy forced a smile and stepped aside. Daniel frowned. "Mom, Ethan belongs in the picture." Margaret laughed as if it were all a misunderstanding. "Oh, don't be so serious. We'll take another one later." That second picture never happened. An hour later, Ethan walked over to Margaret with the handmade card. He held it behind his back, smiling nervously. "I made something for you." Margaret accepted it without much interest. She opened the card, looked at it for barely 2 seconds, then placed it beside a stack of unopened mail. "Thank you." She immediately turned back to her conversation. No hug, no appreciation, no kind words. Ethan stood there for a moment, waiting. Finally, he whispered, "You're welcome." When he returned to me, I could see he was trying not to cry. "Maybe she's busy," he said quietly. I smiled, though my heart was breaking. "I'm sure she noticed how much work you put into it." He nodded, trying to believe me. Dinner was finally ready. Everyone gathered around the large dining table. There were more than 20 people squeezed into the room. The table looked beautiful. Golden turkey, fresh rolls, mashed potatoes, stuffing, pumpkin pie waiting in the kitchen. Margaret stood to make the Thanksgiving toast. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about traditions. She talked about blessings. Then she smiled proudly. Our family has always stayed strong because blood is thicker than water. Something about the way she said those words made me uncomfortable. I noticed Daniel shift uneasily beside me. Margaret continued, "Family should always protect its own." Then her eyes slowly moved toward Ethan. She smiled, but there was no kindness behind it. Some people don't understand that. The room became unusually quiet. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom." She ignored him. "Our family name has been passed down for generations." She lifted her glass. "And one day, everything we have will stay with our real family." Nobody spoke. Several relatives exchanged nervous glances. Ethan lowered his eyes toward his plate. He didn't fully understand the conversation, but he understood enough to know she was talking about him. I reached beneath the table and gently held his hand. His tiny fingers were trembling. Daniel finally spoke. "That's enough." Margaret shrugged. "What?" "I'm only telling the truth." The silence that followed felt heavier than the meal itself. No one wanted to challenge her. Everyone simply looked away. I realized something in that moment. Silence doesn't always mean people agree. Sometimes it means they're too afraid to do what's right. I wish that had been the worst part of the evening. I truly do. Because only minutes later, something happened that none of us would ever forget. As everyone began passing the food around the table, Ethan reached for the bowl of mashed potatoes. His sleeve accidentally brushed against his glass of apple juice. The glass tipped over. A small splash landed across Margaret's expensive white tablecloth. It wasn't much, just enough to leave a light stain. Ethan's face turned pale. "I'm sorry, Grandma." He immediately reached for a napkin, but before he could clean it up, Margaret slowly stood from her chair. Her expression changed completely. The smile disappeared. Her eyes filled with anger. And in the terrifying silence of that Thanksgiving dinner, she raised her hand. Margaret's hand remained raised for only a second. But in that single second, time seemed to stop. Every conversation ended. Every fork froze in midair. Even the football game playing on the television faded into the background. Ethan stood motionless, clutching the napkin in his tiny hands. I'm sorry," he whispered again. "I didn't mean to spill it." Margaret stared at the stain on her expensive tablecloth as though it were the greatest insult she had ever experienced. "You always ruin everything," she snapped. Before anyone could react, her hand struck Ethan across the face. Smack! The sound echoed through the dining room. The force of the slap knocked the napkin from his hands. His small body stumbled backward. He lost his balance and fell onto the hardwood floor. The handmade Thanksgiving card slipped from his sweater pocket and landed beside him. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Ethan placed one trembling hand against his burning cheek. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry. He simply looked around the room, searching for anyone, who might tell him he wasn't alone. Instead, he found 22 silent faces. Margaret wasn't finished. She pointed toward the front door. "I've had enough of this. He's not real family. He doesn't belong at my table. Take him and leave." Those words cut deeper than the slap ever could. I looked at Daniel. Surely he would say something. Surely he would protect the little boy he had promised to call his son. Instead, he sat frozen. His face had turned pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Across the table, Daniel's father lowered his eyes. One of Daniel's sisters quietly wiped away a tear. Another relative stared at his dinner plate as if nothing had happened. No one defended Ethan. No one challenged Margaret. The silence felt louder than her shouting. I slowly stood from my chair. The room watched me carefully. I ignored every pair of eyes. Instead, I walked toward Ethan. He was still sitting on the floor, trying to understand why his grandmother hated him so much. I knelt beside him. Without saying a word, I gently brushed his hair away from his face. A bright red handprint was already beginning to appear on his cheek. My heart shattered. "Ethan," I whispered. "Look at me." He slowly lifted his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom. I made Grandma angry." Tears filled my eyes. "No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. It was only an accident." His voice trembled. "Does she hate me?" I couldn't answer, because I knew the truth. Instead, I wrapped my arms around him and held him close. No child should ever have to ask that question, especially not on Thanksgiving. After helping Ethan to his feet, I picked up the handmade card from the floor. One corner had bent during the fall. I carefully smoothed it with my fingers. Then I turned toward Margaret. She folded her arms confidently. "If you're waiting for an apology," she said, "don't. Someone has to teach that boy respect." For the first time since entering her house, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even upset. Something inside me had changed. Years of trying to keep the peace, years of making excuses, years of hoping she would finally accept Ethan, all of it disappeared in that single moment. I realized I had been asking the wrong question. The question was never, "How do I make Margaret love my son?" The real question was, "Why am I allowing someone who doesn't love him to keep hurting him?" The answer was simple. I wasn't anymore. I reached into my handbag. Several relatives looked confused. Margaret smirked. "What now?" I removed a large sealed envelope, the same envelope I had carried with me for months. I placed it quietly on the dining table. Nobody understood why. Daniel looked at me with confusion. "Sarah, what is that?" I met his eyes. "You'll understand in a minute." Then I turned back toward Margaret. She laughed. "Trying to scare me?" I calmly slid the envelope across the polished table until it stopped directly in front of her plate. The room remained completely silent. Then I spoke 6 calm words that changed everything. "You'll never see my son again." The smile disappeared from Margaret's face. She laughed nervously. "Oh, don't be dramatic. You always come back." I shook my head. "No, this time. We're leaving forever." Then I gently tapped the envelope with one finger. "And before we go, you should open that." Margaret frowned. For the first time that evening, she looked uncertain. Slowly, she reached for the envelope. She had no idea that what she was about to read would destroy everything she believed she controlled. Margaret laughed as she picked up the envelope. "So, what is this? Another empty threat?" I looked at her calmly. "No, open it." She pulled out several legal documents. At first, she looked confused. Then her face slowly lost its color. Daniel leaned over and read the first page. It was a letter from his grandfather, William. "Family isn't built by blood. It's built by love, loyalty, and kindness. For years, I've watched Ethan become the only child who visited me without expecting anything in return. He treated me with respect when others only cared about my money." The room fell silent. Daniel continued reading. "Because of this, I've changed my will. Most of my estate, including my lake house and trust fund, will belong to Ethan." Margaret snatched the papers from his hands. "This can't be real," she shouted. I quietly placed another notarized document on the table. "It's real. Grandpa William made this decision months ago." Just then, the front door opened. To everyone's surprise, William slowly walked into the dining room with his cane. He looked at Ethan's red cheek, then turned to Margaret. "Did you hit him?" Margaret couldn't answer. William shook his head. "I didn't remove you from my will because of money. I did it because you forgot what family truly means." He gently placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "This little boy has more love in his heart than anyone else in this room." Margaret's hands began shaking. The dinner plate slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the floor. For the first time in her life, she realized she had lost something far more valuable than an inheritance. She had lost her family. Some people believe family is created by blood. Others know family is created by love, loyalty, and protection. The day someone hurts your child and everyone stays silent, silence becomes a choice. And sometimes, walking away is the greatest act of love you'll ever make. She had lost her family,